Hello, I'm Susan Cole.
And I'm Vanessa Apea.
And welcome to Health and Power, the live broadcast series about health inequalities affecting people of colour and, crucially, steps we can take to address it.
Thanks so much, Susan. And as ever, we have two fantastic guests on with us. Always a real privilege to have people to take time out of their day to come and speak to us, and we're so appreciative. So first of all, we have Roxy Murray. So Roxy is a fierce advocate for disability rights and sex positivity as a pansexual person living with multiple sclerosis. She's the founder of the Sick and Sickening podcast, where she really shares unfiltered stories about living with disability and illness. And it's really Roxy's mission to empower disabled and chronically ill individuals using her fashion background as a stylist as a tool of activism, and really creating a space and pushing for visibility for people from ethnically diverse backgrounds and the LGBTQIA plus community. And in addition to her advocacy work, Roxy campaigns for inclusion and equity, really calling out the lack of diversity and inclusion within the medical industry, charity sector, and corporate businesses and organizations. And we are so happy to have Roxy on today. And then we've also got Husseina Hamza, who is the co-founder and director of Red Ribbon Living Well. And this is a volunteer-led community organization for individuals affected by and living with HIV. She's been a fantastic community advocate for over 15 years, working in areas across sexual and reproductive health, mental health, female genital mutilation, should I say, and domestic abuse. And actually, Husseina was most recently involved in a peer research study which involved interviewing people living with HIV in the UK, really about their experiences during COVID-19. So as ever, we've got a great show ahead.
I'm really excited to have this conversation with these incredible people. And also, I think it's quite pertinent that we have them on because it's Black History Month in October. And the theme of this year's Black History Month is saluting our sisters. And so often, Black women, we face intersecting forms of stigma and discrimination and disadvantage. And so often our contributions are ignored, our ideas are appropriated, and our voices silenced, when in reality we achieve so much. So I think it's time that our achievements and our resilience is celebrated.
Well, completely agree, Susan. And I think when you said about it being appropriated, because that's one of the painful things. There are powerful things that have been said, powerful actions, visibility for Black women, but they're not acknowledged. And we know that they are of value because other people are appropriating them and using them in a different form, but it's not acknowledged as coming directly from Black women and what we stand for. So I think it's wonderful that we've got a Black History Month dedicated to that.
Fantastic. So shall we bring on Roxy?
We shall. That's great.
Hiya.
Hi, Roxy.
Hello.
Thank you so much for being here.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
It's great. Well, before we launch into the questions, Roxy, I thought it'd be good if you could explain in your words what multiple sclerosis is, because we really spend time in kind of sharing people's bios so people know the great work that people do. But I think I'm wondering, when I said multiple sclerosis, I'm sure there'll be many people watching that may not know exactly what it is. So could you explain, please?
Yeah, of course. So multiple sclerosis is one of those hidden illnesses that people don't know much about, actually. And basically what it is, it's a illness that affects your nervous system and also your brain. So what happens is your nervous system becomes overactive and it starts affecting your myelin sheath, so which is your blood-brain barrier, and it can cause lesions to form on your spinal cord or in your brain. And those lesions can affect anything from your mobility your speech, as you'll probably tell as we talk, and also your cognitive functioning. So for me, my memory is not always amazing, or I'll meet someone and then maybe I'll forget that I've met them, or I cannot recall their name. And it becomes an issue when trying to be like, someone's like, I remember you. And I'm like, I remember you, but I cannot recall that information.
Thank you, Roxy. And one thing that just reading a bit about your story, and something that comes across is the fact that you were diagnosed quite late or misdiagnosed. Do you think the fact that you're a person of colour was a contributing factor in that?
Absolutely. So obviously I'm 35 now. Back then I was 18 when I first presented with symptoms, which now I know is classic MS. It's like I woke up with double vision in one eye, blindness in the other, just all the reactions I was having. But when they did tests and stuff, because I was brown and they didn't actually scan my spinal cord, which we now know was the biggest issue ever, they just thought I had lupus. They were like, oh, well, you know, you've got a bit of blindness, your walking's been affected, you're brown, you're Caribbean. It's probably lupus, antiphospholipid syndrome, and benign corneal hypertension, because my spinal fluid was rising too quickly, putting pressure on my optic nerves behind my eye, hence why I was going blind and having double vision. I lived with that for 8 years, was having random effects, probably worse than I'm actually having now, I would say. And it was only because I had a massive relapse and went to a whole different hospital in Kent that a female doctor was like, you've also had a mini stroke, which I couldn't even see myself. And she was like, nothing seems to be adding up. I know you hate lumbar punctures. They're not fun. If anyone knows what lumbar puncture is, it's not fun. Can you please allow me to do one more? I will test your spinal fluid. Red flag, no one had done that before. And also I will give you a full body scan. They caught the fact that my lesions were in my spinal cord and not in my brain. So that was why no one had seen any lesions for me for 8 years. And she was like, I'm going to send this off. I think you've got MS. I can't say absolutely 100% until I get these test results back. A few weeks later, she was like, you have MS. And it was basically down to the fact that even though I am of multiple races, they just saw me as black, and that was it.
Gosh, you know, there's never more powerful a story unless someone, you know, explains themselves and goes through exactly what they went through. And it is really shocking when you hear it. And I think part of it is about representation and what people see when they think of multiple sclerosis. And so, kind of extending of what you've just said, how did the representation of or the lack of representation in MS world, in the MS world, how did it impact you? And what did you then think, right, that you needed to do to challenge it?
So no one knew that MS was like something that affected brown women or brown men. It was seen to be predominantly actually just a white female illness, and even white men weren't really seen to be in any kind of like publications or any literature that you would read. And obviously because of that, it came down to the fact that we know in the medical field that if you learn certain things when you go into medical rooms and you diagnose people, you have those preconceptions of what people should be presenting to you based on what you know. Obviously that was a few years ago. I'm no longer 18. We know that that's 17 years ago. We've come very far. But what happened was, after like all that time dealing with all the relapse situations I was having with no real understanding, like I know people with lupus, I didn't see the correlation, but I don't know enough about the medical field at this point, and I don't know really, like I can't sit there and go, it's not lupus, even though my friend that has lupus is not presenting the same as me. It could be a medical anomaly, I don't know. But I was stressed, and obviously I went through depression. I was young. I thought I was going to fly off to like Milan and for Paris and go to university and to live a great life. But instead of dealing with this disability and this illness, and I don't really know how to navigate it. It gets worse as time goes on. And then when I get that confirmation that I was misdiagnosed, and the reasons why, really, a lot of it was also down to, apparently I was chubby, so probably because you're fat, you should lose some weight, that might help. I'm like, okay, cool, I get it, but I don't think it did actually. And now knowing it, it doesn't really discriminate based on race or size. But that's what we know now when we're older and wiser, but then we didn't. And I was stressed. And when I found out that, I was like, look, I can't be the only person dealing with this. Like, I literally, there's obviously other people out there wondering what is going on. Why do they feel like this? Why are they like not understanding information in the way they used to? Or was their speech is changing? And I went online. And what I realized when I was looking for multiple sclerosis on social media was it kind of presented me to America. And in America, you realize there was a lot more research that was done, and specifically based on Black statistics and Black women. And actually, we realized that Black women do actually get MS at a higher rate than most people. But it was something that we didn't know over here because there was no sharing of medical information through the countries, which now actually, considering what I do as an advocate, and I'm going to actually go like to Milan to talk about this year. I've spoken to people in America and they've come over and they've shared information. Yes, you probably can't go and use that tacitly, but when you're just having the conversations like we're having today, where people are going, well, actually, I know that you haven't done this research in, say, Switzerland or London or somewhere like that, but in LA we have. We're finding that this is actually showcasing in people that are Black way more aggressively too. Why is that? We're not sure, but we're looking into it. But this is something you can consider when you're doing your work. Although we don't have the answers, we're showing you that the picture is changing. And I think changing that and then becoming an advocate, showing my own stories so that people knew, like, if you're feeling certain things, I'm not a doctor clearly, but ask them, could this be MS? Is this something I could be dealing with? And then I started getting really loud and was like, can we please change the literature and put some brown people in there, Muslim people in there, and Indian people in there, so that people know that this is something they could be dealing with, so the conversations can start and we can create that change.
Fantastic. I mean, that's so powerful. And I think it also resonates in so many illnesses that people of colour experience. And I know that you've called out the lack of diversity and inclusion in the charity sector more widely than just MS. What do you think needs to change now?
I think people need diversity within the diversity. Like, it's something. So my mum is white and my dad is from Barbados, so I'm mixed race. And it's something that I was having a conversation with my mum, and I was like, why do white people never realize in their room full of white people that that's kind of strange? I was like, because you'd never go to my Black family and you would never have a room full of just Black people. There's people from all cultures and backgrounds. That is the diversity. And so I think some people, you're doing the right thing. So like if you're disabled and you're creating diversity and better inclusion for disabled, that's a good thing to do. But then when you've got to a certain point, please look around and make sure that you're sharing everyone's voices. Because I have MS. I have friends from all different backgrounds have MS. And if we all share our stories, you realize there's different things. Like my friends have been told they were cursed because they come from a certain background, or my white friend, because they were younger, was told, well, children don't deal with MS. And, you know, there's different narratives within the same narrative. Because you're a wheelchair user, I can't share someone else's story or speak for another race, gender, or sexuality just because I'm also in a wheelchair, because I use a cane, or because I'm talking to you now. My story is my story. And unless you go and speak to someone else with MS or someone else from a different background, we don't get a full picture. We get like a slice of the pie, but I want the whole cake. And call me greedy, but I'd prefer it.
I love it, because we all want the whole cake. and I think that's just the perfect way to put it. You've got to seek the diversity in the diversity, and you've got to be really intentional about it. And we talk about it a lot on this podcast in terms of just really getting out there and making sure that you're drawing in the voices and you're seeing everyone and you're valuing everyone's input. And Roxy, on reflecting about this, just because on one of your blogs, which are great, and I call it out for people to read some of your blogs, you talk about finding your community. And, you know, as you've just started to say about, you know, everyone having a different narrative. What would you say to a person of color that's been newly diagnosed with MS? What do you think they need to know and to recognize that they do have community?
Well, also, I would say the first thing is look at yourself and see how you identify as it, whether that's like racially, sexuality wise, gender wise, all these things come into play, and see what you want to know. Don't use Google first and foremost because it will take down a rabbit hole. I always found like when I did that, that's where I sank into depression. But social media, using certain hashtags like multiple sclerosis, my friend created an amazing place called Talks of MS where it's more about creating community. Obviously, anyone of any color can join, but it's predominantly for Black people because we didn't see each other. Just know that social media has this creative space where people will look like you and will be able to share stories in a way that you want to take in your content, because we all take in content differently. There's poets sharing their story about MS. There's men. So if you're a man, regardless of race, there's men sharing their stories. We didn't have that. Like men never spoke about MS for ages. And there's a lot of guys going like, is there actually any men with MS? And I'm like, there's so many, but it's a different kind of journey to accept that and to not see MS as a weakness and to know that there can be a silver lining. I know not all our stories are going to be the same. We're not going to end up in the same place. We're not going to have the same narrative. But we can also all enjoy our lives and that community structure that we find in our social spaces. TikTok. I mean, it's not a place I'm always there, but there are some amazing stories being shared on TikTok with the hash MS, this is MS, or hashtag multiple sclerosis tags, where people have given you real lived experiences from all different races, different countries in the world. So you're seeing like how someone in India is dealing with it, where someone in America or someone in Africa, and we're getting to share information. So then everyone can empower each other. But it's about taking that first step to accepting that you have MS, which took me a while. It does take a moment to go through that emotional grief because it is grieving. You feel that grief, but then come out the other end and realize that no matter where you are in the world, you can talk to anyone anywhere else in the world at any time of day because there's someone else dealing what you're dealing with. And that is the beauty of social media. That's helped me on my journey.
What a beautiful way to put it.
Beautiful, wonderful. Thank you so much, Roxy, for coming on.
Thank you. It's lovely to see you.
You too.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Oh my goodness, Vanessa. Well, I'm just looking at where you are, and it looks very glamorous indeed.
It does indeed, doesn't it? It's it's really glamorous. I'm actually in Amsterdam at the moment, so live here because I'm at the Fast Track Cities conference, so the 2023 conference, and it's great. It's I always see it as a bit of a celebration of all the work that is happening in all the fast track cities across the world. And these are cities that have made a definite commitment for zero transmission of HIV by 2030. And so we've been listening to all the different initiatives that are happening to really get to that point. So it's great. I'm very lucky.
Fantastic. And I will actually be flying out there myself really early in the morning at 5 o'clock, and I'm speaking in a session about migration and HIV because, as you know more than most, people of color are disproportionately affected by HIV, and it seems to be getting more and more toxic in relation to how migrants are treated.
Definitely, and I think it will be such an important talk, and there's been a lot of discussions about the kind of differential experience that migrants that go through. And I was talking about equity or inequity and really missed opportunities about accessing Black women as well. So yes, lots of great discussion and work being presented.
Fantastic. But let's bring on someone who is an expert in that field.
Husseina.
Hi, Husseina.
Hi, Susan. Hi, Vanessa.
Hello.
Thank you for having me here. And thank you, AIDS Impact, for giving me this opportunity to speak on behalf of migrants.
It's very wonderful to have you on. And Husseina, just in relation to the work that you do, what are some of the challenges that people from migrant communities living with HIV face?
Yes, as my work, most of my work, I work with migrants and refugee asylum seeker. The big challenge which actual people faces from Black African and Caribbean is communication, language barrier. That is the key to what people find it very, very difficult, especially on navigating healthcare service. The language barrier actually is kind of put people not to access the service, because when you reach in this country as an immigrant, English is your second language. And being in a new country, culture, everything is very, very difficult. And you don't know where to start. And especially when you're a migrant, the process of being actually integrate in the community itself, it's also very, very difficult. The other challenge which we are facing is a culture. As I say, culture, for example, as a Muslim person, just being arrived, as a woman, being arrived in a new country, you look at the back where you are coming from, how you have been brought up, and being a new country to start actually navigating where you're going to stay, who you're going to access, who you're going to speak. And English is the second language is very, very difficult. The other thing for migrants, especially people living with HIV, is the stigma and discrimination. Because you look back in Africa, how people have been treated, how the family, how they, in general, and being in this country, you have that mentality, okay, even this country is the same. Where do people can start accessing the service? Here in this country, in UK, say, okay, as you are immigrant, refugee, you can, if you are HIV positive, the treatment is free. But where's that information? There's no information on that showing that, okay, regardless to your status, regardless to your gender, wherever, you can access treatment. There's no that information. The other thing is worry about your immigration status. And you fear that if accessing the healthcare service, I'll be deported, I'll be receiving the treatment. And this is what we hear from the work I do. It's not that it's something that just speak on the street or wherever. It's the living experience and the people who are going through, who are sharing their experience. And I don't think so that it have been hard much, much more for those who actually provide the service or provide the care for people. Yeah.
Husseina, thank you so much, because you're so right. We don't hear enough about these stories and people's experiences. And what we do hear a lot about is anti-migrant narratives, and we see that in the media, and sometimes from the government as well. Quite frankly, and so, what impact do you think this is having on the mental health of asylum seekers?
The mental health, the cause of this can actually not only mental health, because that could be depression, anxiety, isolation, and fear of going out and access those information, because you don't know who to trust. You're in the new country, you don't know who can I speak. So that fear of being actually who to communicate with, who will understand my language, yeah. So it causes a lot of severe mental health, depression, and anxiety. And the most is isolation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, what advice would you give to a migrant living with HIV who may be struggling with mental health issues or feeling isolated?
The advice which I'll be giving actually is just kind of access the information, where you are, try to ask for help, try to ask for support. Because one of the things which we find out is just those people they've been just broke, okay, coming here and access, okay, stay in this country. But the way they have been treated, the way they've been kept, far, far away, maybe from the community, which they can kind of engage. For example, where the work I do, we have like 15 people, 15 people speak different language, and if there's a kind of that interaction or engage with community organization, who are working with migrant and refugee, that could be a first point actually to support those refugee and migrant who are coming to this country, because we could work with them. If a person is speaking Swahili, there's someone speaks Swahili, and try actually to give an information, talk to the person and address actually to access the healthcare service. If a person speak French or Yoruba or, all those kind of things, could we make it easier for our immigrant to access not only healthcare service, other service provider, like migrant immigration status, how to find a lawyer, how to find someone who can advocate on their behalf, someone who can speak, on their or interpret on their language. So could make that life of this person when they are still waiting for their migrant, but there's some service they can be supported in the community.
Husseina, thank you. Gosh, it's just really sobering to hear it, because it's, as you say, we don't talk enough about people's experiences. And I think it's also great to hear about what support there is out there. And as you said, having organizations such as yourselves that really intentionally bring the right people there so people can feel at home is just so important. And there's another aspect of your work that you do that is really crucial and came out obviously, well, not obviously, but because of COVID. And you were a peer researcher in a study that was looking at the experiences of people from Black communities during COVID. And just wondering, what were some of the issues that people shared with you? And was it similar to other things that you've been talking about today?
Yeah, through the research which I did during COVID and people living with HIV, there's a lot of issue come around there. One, as I say again, I'm still talking about communication and language barrier, is accessing healthcare like GPs and hospital. Yeah, so that was a big challenge and barrier, because an immigrant person, just speak on the phone. You cannot express, what is going on. How you cannot express actually your condition itself, because sometimes you don't know how to say the word of that condition. You just say, oh, my back, but there's something more than your back, oh, my leg, but there's some more on the leg. So that was the big challenge which we find in the barrier of this kind of communication. The second thing is about the telephone again. Some of them, they don't get appointment. Yeah. And the other thing actually is about you have a condition that need immediately to be treated. And you cannot get that appointment. You have to wait for 8 months. How stressful, how depression you go through. You wait for 8 months. You kind of fear, what is this going to happen? If I reach that 8 months, I am going to be alive, or something have been yeah. The other thing which we, during the research, is about the letter who the people living with HIV have received to Shield. And most of the people who I work are migrant and refugee. Some of them, as you know, they don't have cause to public. The funding, yeah.
Mm.
So these people, they receive a letter and they're told to be shielded. And they cannot access any benefit. They need to go to work to pay their bills, to pay their food, you know. So the big challenge was financial stability. Yeah. How can they get money to pay their bills? Because they didn't have a clear information if I am living with it. I have my job. I can go out and work. But because of the fear of this from the government, I have to stay indoors. And
Gosh.
people, what we kind of trying to help and support is providing a food bank. You know? Yeah. And on top of that, those food which been provided to these people, it was another challenge, especially for example, a Muslim person. The food which have been provided in your house are the tins. And some of them, they have pork on it. You see? So that was, you have kind of surviving with those food tin and throw it away, you know, because you can't eat. And when you try to raise this issue that, okay, the food you have been provided for those people, you know, does not, it has kind of, some people are Muslim, they cannot take those food. And the answer they give you is just, okay, that is what we have to provide. The other thing which we find out actually is, is about the abuse, domestic abuse. Yeah. So it was very, very difficult on that time, you know, for example, a woman to go out, you know, and try to seek for help because a person is in the house. They cannot phone, they cannot access the support. So that one we found it to the big, big challenge.
Right.
Husseina, you obviously created such a safe space for people to be so open with you and tell you all of these issues that others may not have been able to get, which is the power of peer research. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming on, Husseina.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh my goodness. And look, like we are out of time. I'd like to say a huge thanks to Disruptive Live for all of their technical wizardry, making this happen, for the lottery, for supporting this broadcast.
And just really saying thank you to our guests again, Roxy and Husseina. Always wish we had more time, but you've just given us so many powerful things to think about. And next month, we will see everyone on the 23rd of October, Monday again, with some fantastic guests. A good friend and colleague, Dr. Rageshri Dharawan, will be on. Very excited. And also Dr. Stephen Okoli, who is a consultant hematologist specializing in sickle cell disease, will be on as well. So another great show that we're really excited about.
Okay. Well, I'll see you tomorrow in Amsterdam and see the rest of you next month. Thanks very much. Bye.
Bye-bye.